Yeah, but you know what, Walt? You can never turn your back on the wind on a day like today because, as you mentioned, just in my backyard, look, it's not all about what's happening in my backyard, but this is just an example of visually what we saw this morning and what I experienced. That plywood right there, that got knocked over. You know, it's a wide area, so it's easier to catch the wind, but it's not a light object, and it got blown down. And then this just happened maybe about 10 minutes ago. That's my pool cover there, and the thing that winds it up, that got blown into the pool because of the wind. So we're definitely experiencing it in the valley. Now, getting wind in the valley in the morning is not that uncommon. As we know, you get something called the delta breeze, which is a thing that happens in the summer. It gets hot, and then as the evening cools down, that ocean wind tends to rush in. So the wind that I should be experiencing, if it's windy this time of year, should be a cool delta breeze, but it's not. It's dry. It's very warm out here, into the 80s. And I want to talk about Bill's point earlier because he was frustrated and confused about why, if it's not windy in Nevada City, why would the power be shut off? And if I could spend just a few minutes talking about that, because this is the #1 thing that we hear about, that we talk about, that we try and explain during these power safety shutoffs. The way that energy works, you may not think about it because, you know, you turn on the lights and the light bulb goes on and then that's it, and that's all you really need to know about how power works at your house. But, you know, we've made this collective decision in many of these cities and communities that power is made somewhere else. Power is made in some cases out of state because there might be different environmental regulations, especially when it comes to coal, natural gas, and some of those other things. And then it's transmitted to places like California. California, in addition to out-of-state power, also has hydropower, which is created by dams, natural gas plants, geothermal power, which is very big in the Lake County area, and wind power and solar. But remember, it's almost always not in your neighborhood, in your town. It's almost always somewhere else. So as the power is generated via a whole bunch of different methods, then it needs to be moved through power lines to get closer to your neighborhood. In some cases, it starts to wane and then has to be repeated. It has to be juiced up to keep it moving. And then it eventually gets to your power pole in your backyard. And this is called a distribution line. And most people think about, well, hey, if it's windy, if it's not windy here, then I don't need to worry about these breaking and causing a fire. Now, in some cases, the winds will be strong enough that that may be a problem, and a transformer will blow off a power pole or something like that. But mostly what PG&E and other power companies in California, by the way, it's not just PG&E, Southern California Edison, and also San Diego Gas and Electric, they also have the same similar scenario where they're, in many cases, bringing in power from out of state in order to meet their demand. And as it moves through very rugged terrain like mountains, canyons, passes, ridgetops, which, if you know the terrain of California, we're loaded up with all sorts of extreme terrain changes. That's where those power lines happen to be, those big tall towers and the transmission lines. So as power's flowing through there, if the wind is extreme and the fire conditions is extreme in those areas, not your house, but in those areas, that's the concern. So that's where they've been shutting down the power on the big lines coming in. And then if you don't have power coming in off those lines, then there's no power that's available to come in off the distribution lines, the power poles, or the other substations to come to your house. So it's a, you know, it's a out of sight, out of mind situation, but that's in general how a lot of this stuff works. So if it's not windy in Nevada City, it is very likely it's very windy somewhere else where your power comes from, and that's what's been interrupted or cut off, and that means there's nothing to come to you. Now, that's not always the case, but in general, that's what we've been seeing because we followed this story big time during all the other power safety shutoffs, and it's unfolding again. They're trying to narrow it. They're trying to find different ways to sort of come in between, and they're working on it. It's a big problem. They're working on it, but that's where we are at the moment. Okay, let's go ahead and talk about the weather situation because this is huge for everybody. What we're going to be dealing with is very poor air quality. If you haven't been following, one of the biggest fires we've seen break out lately is something called the Creek Fire. That's near the mountains by Fresno. It is a very big fire. They've had to do a ton of overnight evacuations, and for South Lake Tahoe, that's the reason why they have purple air, hazardous air. Now, there's a number of other fires that have been swirling around, not quite out, and that's creating unhealthy air, which is red, and that's going to be for a good chunk of the valley, not only now, but for the rest of this morning. Now, as the winds pick up, it's possible it may disperse, it may move somewhere else, but just remember, air quality is a huge part of how your day is going to go. The strong winds are already here, folks. I've been showing you my backyard, which valley spots are typically not a very windy spot, but we're seeing it down low and we're seeing it up high. Red flag warning conditions, because not only is the wind blowing, but look how warm it is. It's only 8 o'clock in the morning, it's almost 80 degrees. Now, we will not be as hot as where we were yesterday, so that is good, but the problem is that we'll be hot enough, and we're definitely going to be a lot drier than yesterday, and we're looking at strong winds all day long. So again, let's focus on the wind situation. You know, right now it's windier in Marysville than it is in Placerville, where there's likely some power out in that area. So again, it's that frustrating disconnect of where the power comes from and what's actually happening in your neighborhood. But you can see if you go into the Sierra foothills higher up than Placerville, where some of your power is generated via hydroelectric power plants at the bottom of some of these dams, that's maybe where they're shutting off the power. It just all depends on the situation and where they are detecting the stronger winds. Remember, they're going to be up to about 1,000 new weather stations in many more locations, so they're trying to pinpoint exactly where the wind is and where it isn't. And one of the hot spots, folks, out by Santa Rosa, that coastal range zone, we know has had huge outbreaks of fires, including the Kincaid fire, which was, they believe, caused by a power line that was not shut off, even though many others in the area were. So this is how things will play out today, hour by hour. This is focused on the valley, but that tells part of the story. You can see that we've got strong winds pretty much all day long, highs in the 90s and also very dry air. Not a record-breaking day, but you know what? Some days aren't about how hot it's going to get, it's how windy and dangerous the fire conditions will be. Now, this is going to be for the entire area of Northern California. The area in red is where we have a red flag warning. This includes the coastal range for the higher terrain. The North Bay Hills is what they call it. Also out toward the Santa Cruz Hills, or Santa Cruz Mountains area, which has already been ravaged by fires caused by lightning. And we're going to be looking at the valley floor, dealing with fire conditions, as well as the Sierra. Just this morning, so you know, there's been 2 grass fires. One near Linda that was reported by CHP, and one near 505 and 16. So fires are already happening on the valley floor in grassy areas, and you know, some of these communities, you're right next to a big open field. If the grass burns and if the wind direction takes it to your neighborhood, some of these subdivisions are right next door to big areas of dead vegetation and very dry fuels. So that's how it's going to play out through this morning. We're going to be looking at wind everywhere, but strongest gusts are going to be in the Sierra. And then by this afternoon, we're going to have an odd situation where the valley floor will see some of the strongest winds. And then we're going to be looking at the Sierra kind of calming down a little bit. And that will lull you into this false sense that we're over, but we're not. Look what happens when the sun goes down. We're going to have decently strong winds for the valley, but in other words, winding down from places like Sacramento, Stockton, Modesto, but it's just ramping up in the Sierra foothills, gusts up to 50 to 60 miles per hour. By the way, I'm sure by now I'm not mentioning something you really want to know about. That's why we have meteorologist Carly Gomez on standby, monitoring your Facebook comments, and she will answer as many as she can, as will I, after this is through. We will be following up with you, and then by early tomorrow morning, the wind in general starts to die down in the valley, eventually by noon in the Sierra, and then we're in a better spot. But the warm weather will remain for a while. 90s are here to stay for the next 7 to 10 days, but the most critical fire conditions in the near term is right now, definitely overnight, and early tomorrow morning. And just so we know one other thing about the longevity of the ongoing fires, I just saw an update about the Creek Fire near Shaver Lake in the mountains by Fresno. Their expected date of containment on that one is October 15th. So anything that starts or is already going is gonna keep going for a while. So we need to do our part to not create the new Great California wildfire. We've had way too many this year. 2 million acres burned. Yeah. It's a record already. Yeah. We don't need any more.
Yeah, September 9th, Rob. That's where we are today, and you mentioned that fire, October 15th, is when they expect to contain that. But between September 9th, how long are we going to be in this situation of rolling power outages, wind, dry? There's so much dry fuel. So are we really looking at sort of being in this mindset until we get our first rain or something substantial?
Yes. Well, I don't like saying that, But that's where we are, because what we already know about the fuels is that they're bone dry, they're basically max dried out, and they're not going to get any moisture anytime soon. At least I don't see it in the weather forecast. And climate-wise, we traditionally don't get our big storm that kind of puts an end to this, or at least tamps it down big time, until sometime in middle to the end of October. Hopefully we get something earlier than that, but that's traditionally how this plays out. And some of the worst fire conditions of the year happen in September, October, and November.
Yeah.
And in recent years, Walt, we've had them all the way until December. One of the biggest fires in state history was the Thomas Fire in Ventura, Santa Barbara County, and that was burning almost up until Christmas Day.
Yeah, the new thing is fire season's year-round now, and maybe there's a lot of reasons for that. Okay, Rob.